Hello, this is Russell Dobular filling in for Jimmy Dore, who should be landing any minute now. I know the throngs are already at LAX waiting. It's very much like the Beatles' first trip to New York. So if you're out there, say hi to him. We will see him soon. We are joined today by my colleague, Keaton Weiss, and by a guy that nobody's heard from in like a year. It's crazy. He used to be very loud. Now he's being really quiet. Matt Taibbi. Let's welcome Matt Taibbi to the show. How are you, Matt?
I'm good. How are you doing, Russ?
All right. We're finally getting some of that weather that I've been hearing about. It's actually very nice today. It's been freezing here.
Don't we? Yeah, you look good. You look less right wing without the goatee. The goatee was pretty right wing. Yeah. Although I gotta say, I mean, I would say you're half out of the woods, but people must tell you a lot that you look young for your age, which means you must exercise and stay in good health. That's also right wing, to be in good physical health.
Oh, so, yeah, I heard that exercise codes is right wing now.
That's right wing, exactly. Yes, so really, what you got to do, I mean, you're off to a good start losing the goatee because that was extremely right wing, but now. I would say gain 75 pounds. And, you don't have to signal your class privilege by washing your face every day. You could grow a few pimples and put on a few pounds, and then you'll be in the clear. No one will bother you. They'll be like, oh, this is a legit leftist right here. No questions asked.
That's excellent. That's a really good idea.
That's a good idea. I mean, it's a lot easier than like writing all these articles, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a couple of comments about the goatee. People seriously suggesting that there was a right wing element to it.
Really, having a goatee?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I actually I told somebody last time you were on that we were almost exactly the same age, and somebody said, "Yeah, Russ has done some hard living."
That's not very nice.
Yeah, well,
I'm sure I look a lot worse inside. Trust me.
I don't know about that. I like those double doubles at In-N-Out Burger. That's not. I'm sure it's not doing any good for my insides. But you can't have them back in New York, fortunately. Oh, I've got to intro you, Matt. We are nothing here if not pros. All right, so Matt Taibbi is an author and journalist who has reported on finance, media, politics, and sports. A former contributing editor for Rolling Stone, he is the author of several best-selling books, including Insane Clown President, I Can't Breathe, and Hate Inc. His newsletter, Racket News, currently boasts more than 100,000 subscribers on Substack, and he also co-hosts the America This Week podcast with novelist Walter Kern. All right. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right. So this is where you started a shitstorm this week, like you do. All right. So you put this, originally you put this up on Notes, I'm assuming, and then somebody copied it to Twitter, right?
Well, somebody asked me the question, so.
Okay. So you were responding to a question, honestly. And you got it opened a lot of wounds for a lot of people. All right. So this is something, I think it's interesting to get into. I told you before we went on, I don't want to get into a lot of drama, but this isn't really drama. This is kind of core for a lot of people who are kind of confused about where they are on the spectrum ideologically or what right and left means at this point. In your case, you're testifying before Congress. You're being viciously attacked by Democrats. You're being given a platform by Republicans. It gets extremely confusing. Like, well, so who's the left and who's the right? The free speech advocate is Jim Jordan, and the person going after you is Stacey Plaskett. So you said here, why I don't spend a lot of time on Republicans. You said there's an enormous army of mainstream media reporters already going after them from every angle, with most major news organizations little more than proxies for the DNC, to the point where stations hire Biden spokespeople as anchors. Do you want to elaborate on that? Because some people have pushed back and said, well, but there's a whole conservative media complex too. Do you feel that the Democrat complex is bigger or more powerful?
Well, it's certainly bigger. I mean, the right-wing media. I mean, they have Fox still, which is the top cable show. And there is Fox News broadcast, but virtually the rest of the major corporate media organizations are, I guess what you would call traditional legacy media outlets, and they've kind of gone over. And this is what I wrote about in Hate Inc. years ago: is that they were starting to move in the direction of this audience optimization model of media, where you're picking your demographic and then kind of feeding it stuff that they like.
Right.
So that's been a dramatic change in the press since 2016. A lot of it is driven by economics, but yeah, I think it's true that most journalists, even if you include Fox in there and the Daily Wire and all that other stuff, there's more media horsepower being kind of aimed in the other direction than there is in the conservative direction. And that probably wasn't true as recently as the Bush years. When you saw phenomena like MSNBC kind of going along with the march to the Iraq War.
Right.
Now it's a little different. Now the other stations are setting the tone. So I think that I also we've also seen polls about the political orientation of people who work at mainstream news organizations, and it's pretty overwhelming, right? Like it's 93% of the people who don't work at a Fox-like organization, they won't vote Republican, let's put it that way, right? And then you saw that Pew Center survey that talked about who the readership is for the New York Times and the listenership for NPR versus Fox. It's a complete inverse relationship. It's just that there's more of those organizations on the other side.
Well, do you think part of the perception that it's equal or more equal is that liberals code people like Joe Rogan, who I would not consider right-wing, as right-wing? So they kind of include that as part of the media. Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, they'll kind of see that as media, which in a sense, given that people's consumption habits have changed, you could make an argument for that other than Rogan coding that way.
You could. I don't think that's true. I mean, I think Joe is probably to the left of 70% of America.
Sure.
And Tucker obviously is a big voice, and he's on X. That's absolutely true. But there are an awful lot of professional reporters. I mean, I guess this is the distinction that I'm drawing. I used to work in kind of traditional legacy media where, for instance, if you went on and you covered the presidential election and there would be a plane full of journalists, there would be a couple from Fox and a couple from conservative organizations, and then everybody else in the plane was from legacy media and worked at the Boston Globe, LA Times, all these organizations. And those people now are just overwhelmingly on one side. There are very few people who are investigative journalists, like traditional investigative journalists, who will go after both sides. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So and then the question of like Trump corruption. Get in line. I mean, how do you find an opening that somebody hasn't done before on Trump at this point? But that's not even the main reason why it doesn't interest me. It's like I wrote a whole book about Trump. I thought he was like the most amazing character at one point in the narrative arc. The main the thing that happened to me was I was gonna do a whole monthly thing on Trump for Rolling Stone, like a big diary, like Hunter Thompson style thing. And then we ran into this problem with Russiagate, where I started to have this feeling that maybe Trump's accusers were as big a story as he was, and that was a dilemma that could not be resolved at an organization like Rolling Stone, and so that sensation has only increased since then. I mean, now we're in a situation where we have sort of broad attacks on constitutional rights under this sort of vague formula that like rights equals protects Trump equals bad. And I really worry about that. I think that's a bigger story than Trump. So that's kind of where I am. It's not that I like Trump or I like Republicans. I mean, I think anybody who's read anything I've written knows that. I think the other thing is a bigger story.
All right.
So it sounds like the distinction, like to crystallize that a bit, is that I think and if this is not what you mean, then please let me know. But it sounds like the prominent conservatives in the media space sort of present themselves as such, right? Tucker is an opinion guy. What you see is what you get. He's mostly right of center. And that is sort of opinion commentary. Whereas I think, and I would say you're right about this, if this is what you mean. Like I said, let me know if I don't want to put words in your mouth. But like, it seems to me like you're saying the people masquerading as objective down the middle reporters really may as well function as Democrat operatives.
Yeah, basically. I mean, and once upon a time, your best investigative journalists in the landscape were unpredictable. That was like a quality that was kind of central to understanding who they were. I mean, Seymour Hersh, I can't tell you how many times he got in trouble for kind of going in the wrong direction or crossing colleagues. He got himself kind of quasi excommunicated for doing the CIA family jewel story in the mid 70s. There are a lot of reporters who do stories that other people don't like for political reasons, because there is a variety of journalists, and I think I hope I belong to this tradition, where what interests me is whether it's a good story or not. Like, I don't really care about the politics. At some level I do, but maybe that's not something I'm going to disclose publicly. When I'm evaluating what to write about it, I think, how explosive a story is this? And that's what interests me, so the politics of it don't really matter. And I've seen the Republican Party, to me, like, I wrote an obituary for the Republican Party in 2016 when Trump beat them won the Indiana primary. I don't see them as a coherent, functional, institutional power. They are maybe at the state level. But this other thing that's happened that is hard to explain and describe, but it's this kind of fusion of the Democratic Party with Bush conservatives and the intelligence community and federal enforcement bureaucracies. People talk about it as the uniparty. I think that's kind of a casual, name. I wish there was something that was more accurate, but I think there's something to it. I think, to me, it's not Democrats and Republicans. It's much more like a government bureaucracy versus a Trumpian rebellion. I think the government, the first character, is bigger, scarier, and more able.
Well, that's kind of an interesting formulation, because you're right. It does seem like everyone to the left of Mitt Romney has kind of consolidated, and then everybody to the right of Mitt Romney has kind of splintered apart, right? Because like they can't get it together on the Ukraine funding. They keep trying to swap out Speaker of the House for another one. Now they're threatening Mike Johnson. So it does seem like, on that populist right side, there's a lot less unity. And a lot of the, more centrist, what passes as centrist anyway, Republicans have sort of partnered up with the more centrist Democrats. And now, obviously, even the squad-like Democrats fall in line. You had AOC and Stephen Colbert doing a full-on Russiagate segment the other night. So it does seem like there's unity on the anti-Trump side from progressive Democrats to never Trump Republicans, whereas on the Republican side, what would really pass for actual right wing, there's not nearly as much organization.
Right, and even you can even see in the media space. I mean, in the 2000s, if you turned on Fox News, it was going to be, they were on message like 100% of the time. There was nothing that was unpredictable in conservative media at that time. Now, you know, occasionally you get some pretty interesting or weird reporting on the conservative side. There are heated disagreements, which, you know, you didn't see before. But, you know, I agree with you. I think the main split is between this cohesive, powerful, very, very disciplined Democratic Party, which has now, you know, encompassed, you know, a lot of people from the Bush world. And against that, you have Trump. Now, Trump is not an insignificant character. He has a major power base, but it's almost entirely voters. It's like 75 million pissed off people. And he just doesn't have the same institutional oomph, I don't think, that these other characters do. And that was one of the things about that was interesting about the Twitter file story to me. Like, you know, it revealed connections that I didn't really know about before, you know? So that's kind of where I'm thinking on that.
Well, that's how, and we're going to get into it a little bit more as we go. But that's how a lot of this pushback strikes me. The whole field of journalism has so become consumed by opinionating and a kind of op-ed style. People don't really know what to do with a journalist. It seems like in many areas, and I'm gonna show this later on, you went out for a while preaching the evangel of censorship and why it's a bad thing to liberals, to try to get this across to them. And you actually went to Brooklyn to communicate this. Like, does every journalist have to specialize in everything? Like, you have a beat that you've chosen, and it seems like you just drill down into this area, and it doesn't seem particularly partisan. It just is what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that, yeah, maybe it's a new feature of media that's different from when I was growing up. People kind of expect each person to be their own news service and to divvy up their coverage according to like a percentage that makes sense to them, like that's fair and all in one direction. Whereas in reality, you know, what I've mostly done my whole life is you start with some subject and your knowledge base is zero when you start, and you progressively know more and more and more about it. And as you know, you go in more directions, but you try to stay on it for as long as you know, you can milk it for something interesting, because you know, that process of accumulating sources and learning and all that stuff, it just takes an awful long time. So, you know, just to take an example, I got assigned to do one story about the crash in after 2008, and we got a big response. So I kept doing it, but there was so much corruption on Wall Street that I kept learning about that I ended up on that beat for almost 9 years. And I would have stayed on it, frankly, if the magazine didn't pull me off it. But you know, this situation with internet censorship is similar. It's a very, very complicated, difficult story with lots of aspects to it that are not yet revealed. We got a big lucky break with the Twitter files in the sense that we saw things that we wouldn't have known about otherwise. And you know, I want to try to keep investigating it until I don't have any more leads to pursue. But I also, you know, I have feelings about it in terms of how, you know, that journalists and people on the left, they should care about it. And interestingly, they are starting to care about it because of Gaza, right. Which is a little bit frustrating to me. But I'll take it, you know. but that's kind of what the problem is that, you know, people, you should be worried about the principle of the thing, because you should be able to see that, you know, it's going to affect everybody eventually. So that's what I was trying to do with that story.
I think the reason why censorship has come back now that Gaza's in the headlines is because the people who were protesting for a ceasefire in the early days after October 7th actually, pardon me, posed a threat to the system. They actually threatened the narrative in a way that I think the powers that be felt was especially dangerous to the narrative that they were trying to push. And as you can see, those protesters and those left movements were very successful, to the point where now Morning Joe is railing against Israel, you know, almost every show of the past week or so. And so I think, you know, this was, to quote a conversation that Russell may quote more at length later on. You know, you said while you were doing the Twitter files, the reason you didn't uncover more censorship of the left is because the left wasn't threatening anybody. And I think since October 7th, the left has kind of got some wind at its back in terms of really influencing the public mind. And now they're getting censored.
Yeah, no, that's right. We did see in the Twitter files that there was concern and action in other countries where the left was threatening to the powers that be in countries like France, for instance, right? Like there were the Gilets jaunes, people were worried about that movement, and there was lots of traffic about what to do about that. But that whole like counter-populist narrative in the United States, it was almost entirely focused on the right.
Right.
And that wasn't, I don't think that has anything to do with intrinsically with the politics of it. It was just that it was a matter of scale and concern on the part of the authorities. Trump had been elected, there had been Brexit, stuff like that. And now you're right. Now there's another thing where, you know, the powers that be want X. They're having a problem getting it because of popular sentiment Y, so they're going to try to suppress it. And that is, you know, that's I think that's a change in the landscape. But the thing that's consistent is that it's censorship of a thing not because of issues like misinformation or harm or anything like or anything that they were claiming. It's really all about the discomfort that is raised within, you know, this sort of power structure about what's on social media and what's on conventional media as well. They want to pressure that all those folks to toe a certain line, and if that involves the left, it does, you know, and yeah, and that's what's happening now.
Hey, there's still tickets available in Stockholm, Oslo, Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Cortland, New York, Oakmont, Pennsylvania, El Paso, Texas, San Antonio, Texas, Edmonton, Alberta, Vancouver, British Columbia, Denver, Ashland, Virginia, and Athens, Georgia. See you there.